Hi everyone! Welcome to a tasting today of 4 really classic British cheeses from Neal's Yard Dairy. My name is Katrin. I've been a cheesemonger at Neal's Yard Dairy for about 4 years now. And what I'll do today is just take you on a bit of a tour around the cheese board here of, again, 4 very traditional, very classic British cheese styles. We'll start with Applebee's Cheshire in the front here, and then move on to Kirkham's Lancashire, and then go to Sparkenhove Red Leicester, and then end with a blue cheese, Colston Bassett Shropshire. What I'll do is just kind of give you a bit of introduction to each cheese, give you a bit of history, a bit of background, and then tell you why I love it and kind of how I would like to enjoy it, what I might pair it with. All very personal opinions, but you know, it's the fun of cheese. It's never a bad way to eat it. Great, so a brief introduction to Neal's Yard Dairy before I dive into the cheese. Neal's Yard Dairy, we are cheesemongers who kind of specialize in both selecting and maturing cheese from around the British Isles, so both the UK mainland and also the Republic of Ireland. We work with about 40 cheesemakers at the moment, and our role really in this is not really a cheesemaker, but we are more what the French might call an affineur, which just means that we are maturers. So we work really closely with our cheesemakers, who oftentimes are very small farms, sometimes just one family or very small production, to both help them improve their make and also select the batches that we think are just phenomenal, bring them back down to London, where we ourselves actually do a lot of the work in maturing the cheeses, taking care of them, rubbing them, brushing them, keeping them at the right temperature, and all that lovely stuff and all the lovely work that goes into getting the cheese to you at its absolute peak. So Neal's Yard Dairy, we started about 40 years ago, I guess about 42, 43, if I'm getting specific, back in 1979. And we started in a very small little space in Covent Garden in the center of London. And if you've been to London, it's really, this area is now very kind of trendy and cool and very colorful and beautiful. But back in the day, 1979, this was quite a derelict, not great part of the city, a lot of kind of rundown buildings, etc. And Neal's Yard was this little kind of corner where several really different kind of businesses all kind of came together to have the same goal of kind of cutting out the middlemen in supplying kind of raw materials. So there was coffee sales, which turned into Monmouth Coffee, you might be familiar with. Kind of Whole Foods, raw foods company kind of came into being, a bakery, etc. And Neal's Yard Dairy was the dairy component of this. So really kind of trying to work with getting, raw materials directly to the consumer. And so our shop back then, so it was run by our founder, Randolph Hodgson, who at the time was really just selling fresh dairy, so yogurts and some fresh cheeses, some ice creams, and he would kind of occasionally, get samples of cheese literally sent to him in the mail, in the post, from people outside of London, kind of thinking he might be able to sell their cheese in London. But there was no information about these cheeses kind of coming with the cheese. It was just quite literally cheese, wrapped in cling film, as a sample. And so he was quite curious and kind of decided to kind of get into his car and kind of go out into the countryside and meet these producers and learn more about the cheese that would then help him kind of sell it better in London. And that's kind of how our entire model kind of came to being. So he got in his little car and went into the countryside, met these producers, met these really kind of families who were making very classic British cheese styles that really were kind of dying out in that kind of very small production, often making with raw milk, very, very small little families. And then bringing this cheese back to London to then sell on to the broader market. And we really kind of grew from there. And we still work on that same model where we visit farms regularly to select batches of cheese and then bring them down to our own maturation rooms in Bermondsey in South London, where our team takes care of them until they're ready to be sold on to the wider world. So that's us, Neal's Yard Dairy. What that kind of translates to here today in the cheeses in front of us are 4 cheeses that we've had, quite a long relationship with from their kind of really from our origins back in the 1970s, 1980s, through to today. Four really classic British styles that are just really staples of any kind of real British cheese board. I'll go generally in order of strength, as I kind of recommend you do for any kind of mixed cheese board. Just allows your kind of taste buds to kind of keep used to the flavor profiles. And in doing so, I will start with Applebee's Cheshire, which is this lovely orange-hued cheese here. Applebee's Cheshire is a really special cheese in the grand scheme of British cheese history because it really used to be Britain's most popular cheese. Back when Britain was a seafaring nation, they had the biggest really navy in the world, Cheshire was a really good sea cheese, if that makes any sense. At the time, it wasn't sold as young as this. This is only about, 4 months old. But they would sell much older Cheshires that were very long lasting, dense, protein-rich cheeses that could really kind of withstand the long sea journeys with the sailors that kind of needed sustenance on the journeys. So, I always thought, growing up that cheddar or Stilton would have always been, Britain's most popular cheese. But back in the day, it was Cheshire. You can just know about the rind, so you can eat the rind on this if you'd like. That's all a natural rind there. It probably won't add too much flavor to the cheese, but what this rind is kind of a leftover kind of mark of how the cheese has been matured. So as a whole, this cheese will have been wrapped in muslin cloth when the cheese has been formed, which is then kind of rubbed in traditionally lard. I think now it's a bit of a different material. But all edible. And then that kind of allows the cheese to breathe as it matures, but also doesn't kind of, keep in too much moisture to kind of make it go off a bit quicker. So that is a natural rind, totally edible, but probably not as tasty as, say, like the Stilton style kind of Shropshire rind, which is really, really nice. But we'll get to the Shropshire. Anyway, so Cheshire, traditionally massive cheese in Britain, but nowadays, the Applebee family is the last family making a traditional raw milk, farm-made, cloth-bound Cheshire in the country. And to take a step back and kind of explain what that kind of means. So raw milk, of course, means that the cheese and the milk has not been heat treated before it's been made into cheese. So it hasn't been pasteurized, which you can make beautiful cheese with pasteurized milk, no question at all. But the beauty of raw milk is that raw milk has not had any of the kind of bacteria that can really kind of create some beautiful flavors killed off in heating it up. So the potential for some really kind of cool flavors that come out in maturation is oftentimes more there in raw milk cheeses. Farmhouse for us means that the cheese is made on the farm by the farmer who owns the milking herd. Which is exactly this for the Applebee family. So it's made on their farm with their own herd's milk. And it's quite a special thing in the world of kind of British cheesemaking today, which is really, really nice. And they are the last family kind of making this cheese in this way in the UK, where there used to be, hundreds of farms making cheese in this style. And the beauty really of a kind of single herd going into a cheese, which is the same for like Lancashire and the Spark and Hoe Red Leicester as well, is that you really get to kind of taste the variety of flavors that you can get from the animal's milk, where they're grazing, their feed, how they're cared for. It's a really, again, kind of localized kind of little slice of Britain that you can get in tasting, the cheese from one herd's milk, which is quite cool. But there we go. I'm getting a bit nerdy about Cheshire now. As you're eating this, I would say, you can slice it off as you like, but also I would just note that this is a really beautiful crumble, this cheese, which you can kind of see as I kind of break it off there. It really kind of just crumbles away. And that texture is really indicative of a Cheshire. It's very open texture. It's not going to be kind of, like a bit more dense as you would get in a cheddar kind of style, or like the Leicester we'll get to. And the way they make this is kind of in line with this, because it's quite a relaxed make in the grand scheme of cheese making. because, oftentimes cheese recipes can be very, strict and rely heavily on exact timings, especially when you get to things like Comte or Gruyere, the kind of Alpine styles that have very specific temperatures and timings to add the rennet and add the whey, drain the whey, etc. And a lot of British styles like Cheshire and like Lancashire, which we'll also see, their making style is kind of made to fit into the life of the family, like the family life on the farm. So of course, traditionally, men were not the cheesemakers. It was women kind of on the farm making cheese with milk while the men were out in the fields. And cheeses like Cheshire and Lancashire, you can really see that these makes are kind of meant to fit around this lifestyle. So they kind of have pauses in them. So you'll get the milk in and you'll add the starter cultures, which kind of kicks off the kind of fermentation process. And then you'll pause and they can go and, make breakfast or kind of get the kids off to school. And, they'll come back and they'll be able to cut the curds after the rennet's been added and then allow those to drain out and again, take another pause, go and make lunch and etc. And so it's a style of make that really has some flexibility in it to kind of work around other kind of errands and everything, which is kind of cool to kind of see that happening still in such a small production, because the Appleby milking parlor still has, its kitchen attached to the actual dairy production room, the kind of cheese production room, which has kind of been lost in a lot of the more kind of industrialized making procedures. But beautiful to kind of see, kind of rolling up a, window shade to kind of look into the cheese room through the kitchen, which is great. Same thing for the Lancashire as well. But there you are. You'll see, of course, it is a quite bright orange cheese. So it is actually quite an orange plate we have here today. And all of these cheeses are colored using the same natural food dye called annatto. And that comes from a bush, I think initially from South America. And it's a natural food dye. So they squeeze the seed pods that gets this, really intense orange coloring. And it can have a slight kind of like mildly spicy, kind of earthy flavor to it. But oftentimes, such a little amount is added to these cheeses that personally, I don't taste too much of a difference, but others might. You may, depending on how sensitive your taste buds are. But there you are. Cheshire, as you're eating this, I think you'll find it, I find it quite it's a very mouth-watering cheese. It has that beautiful kind of crumbly texture where you take a bite and it kind of just makes sure your taste buds water a bit and want to take another one, and it's bright and it's beautifully acidic and very warm and kind of savory. I find it a very, very unique cheese, particularly having grown up in the States, really growing up on just Vermont cheddar so much that Cheshire as a texture and also as a kind of very gentle flavor profile was pretty different for me, and you might feel the same way as well. I find it's a beautiful kind of like tightrope of flavors between kind of savory and kind of lemony and it's beautiful. And it is funny too, sometimes, I don't think any of yours will have this, and I don't think mine has it at the moment, but sometimes you'll see these beautiful kind of like shoots of blue running through this cheese, which of course, because it is quite an open texture, sometimes, if the cheese is bumped during maturation or kind of knocked, or there's an air pocket in there, it might just kind of blue up a little bit, which is completely normal. So if you see a bit of blue in your Cheshire, it's completely normal. And we actually have some customers over here asking us for kind of green fade Cheshire, which is a kind of old school term for Cheshire with blue in it. It does slightly change the flavor. So if you do get a blue piece, I'd recommend giving it a try if you feel comfortable. Pairing wise, I think this is a beautiful, beautiful beer cheese. So we kind of think of it as like a sessionable cheese, as you kind of have like, a session IPA or anything like that. This is a cheese that is at its absolute best when it's, at complete room temperature. It really kind of comes alive with a bit of warmth to it. And also eaten in kind of big chunks. It's not a cheese to kind of slice away very tiny slices, get in there, have a big piece of it, eat it with oat cakes and bread and, IPA is great, a lager, I think it's a really kind of beer and cider cheese. Beautiful melted. I know it doesn't look like it from the texture, but it's a beautiful melter, broiled, great in sandwiches. Very, very versatile cheese. I can wax lyrical about it. For the cheese nerds out there, I would definitely recommend just having a Google for Cheshire cheese history, because it is very extensive and very detailed, and so it's worth a deep dive if you'd like to. Great, that is your first cheese there, Applebee's Cheshire. That's it. So number two cheese here is going to be Kirkham's Lancashire, another beautiful, classic territorial British cheese. Again, made this, very kind of family-friendly make as Cheshire was. And this is made by Graham Kirkham and his team in Lancashire, of course. And again, another raw milk cheese, so unpasteurized. And this that you have here is the kind of younger version of this. So again, about 3-4 months old. We also sell a more mature version of this in our shops. We mature on to about a year old. But personally, I absolutely love the young one. It is just like butter in a cheese. It's so lovely. And like the Cheshire, as you're kind of digging into this, have it in big chunks. Don't be shy. I mean, maybe don't rip it apart with your fingers as I'm doing, or do if you'd like. But it has that really beautiful, quite crumbly texture that the Kirkham family kind of refers to as a buttery crumble, which is exactly that. I mean, just take a sniff, and it just smells like fresh salted butter. It's really, really lovely. It is, I would have to hazard a guess, perhaps us at Neal's Yard Dairy as cheesemongers, maybe one of our favorite cheeses. I would say maybe not the favorite, because everyone's a bit different. But I would say for myself, it is by far and away the one that I always have in my fridge, because it's just so versatile and just such an easy kind of hug in a cheese, if that makes sense. And like Cheshire, again, this is another kind of British territorial cheese. And by territorial, that just means that the cheese is kind of named after the region in which it comes from. So Cheshire, of course, was from, Cheshire, the area. Lancashire is from Lancashire. There you are. But it's another one that, again, used to have hundreds of producers back in its kind of heyday, and, really kind of before World War II. So thinking back to like 1930s, around that time. Many producers on the farm of Lancashire in this, very kind of small scale style, raw milk, cloth bound, etc. Lancashire, again, like Cheshire, has had a cloth binding during its maturation process, but rubbed in butter to mature, which again gives it that beautiful, buttery texture and smell. Anyways, it does just taste like butter. I love it so much. But Graham, again, like the Cheshire, this is the last, real kind of farmhouse producer of Lancashire in the county, in the UK really, where there used to be many more. And Graham is the third generation of his family to be making this cheese. This is, really at its heart, Mrs. Kirkham's Lancashire, which is, of course, his, great-grandmother. And he's still making it to the same recipe that they would make at the very beginning. And what makes Lancashire quite a unique cheese, even in the canon of British cheese making, is they use a bit of a different technique with their curds that kind of give it this beautiful kind of slight like tang and kind of great texture. And to explain that, so typically when you make cheese, you will milk the cows in the morning, or all the milk that kind of goes into a batch of cheese will be from one or two milkings, and then that batch of milk is then used to make that batch of cheese. With Lancashire, this kind of harkens back to a time when herds simply just weren't big enough to be able to create enough milk to kind of make a good batch of cheese. And so what they would do is that they would always kind of hold back a bit of curd from that day's make. And so going forward, that day's cheese is made not only with curd that's, set up and made that morning, but also with a bit of curd from the day before and a bit of curd from the day before. So you have different kind of age profiles of curd going into the same batch of cheese, which gives a really nice kind of like depth of flavor. It's a quite complex cheese for something that is at the heart of it quite buttery and young. It's beautiful. And Graham still uses that technique. And again, like Cheshire, it's a very traditional kind of making setup. They have a kitchen also attached to their dairy. It is quite literally 3 steps away from their family home. I've actually had the pleasure of making cheese with Graham and his team, and it is just it's such a lovely atmosphere. You can just really kind of feel how much love and care kind of goes into these cheeses and goes into the herd and into really every product that they're setting out there, which is beautiful to see. And it really is, a kind of family production. They do have, their own kind of storerooms in the dairy up in Lancashire, but the vast majority of our cheeses come down to Bermondsey, and then we sell on many, of course, at this age profile, so about 3-4 months old. But then again, we do keep on quite a number to mature on longer, to get to about a year old and sell on at that age profile, which makes it a bit more tangy, a bit kind of bolder in flavor, kind of just like a bit bit more kind of oomph to it. So depending on what you love, they can be kind of different profiles for you. I think I had a colleague once describe this to me as the kind of cone of flavor, which I think is a really great way of talking about it, because you have something like Kirkham's Lancashire, which as a quite young cheese, its flavors are beautiful and subtle and very buttery and just easy. And then as the cheese matures and moisture gets drawn out a bit and the flavors intensify and kind of concentrate, all those flavors kind of just expand out, as you would think of a cone in that way. It's hard to describe on a video call, but I hope that makes sense a little bit. I thought it was a very kind of visual for me to kind of think about the way that flavors develop over maturation, to think of it as a cone. But there you are. Like Cheshire, this is a great one to have with quite traditional, chutneys, or again, it melts beautifully. I love it with kind of like sweeter accompaniments too, like a quince paste, maybe some pickle. Again, a great beer cheese, or quite light white wine. I tend to go pretty light on this one. But again, it's just one of those cheeses that I think you'll find yourself reaching for it, in no kind of need to have it set out on a cheese board or anything kind of fancy. It's just a very easy, beautiful cheese. It is great. I hope you guys are loving it. And that's Kirkham's Lancashire. There you are. Probably one of my favorites in the world, I would say. Great. We'll move on now to your third cheese here, getting back into our orange hued cheeses, which is Spark and Hoe Red Leicester. This really beautiful, deeply orange colored cheese there. And this cheese is getting, we're getting up in age profile. So while these are, 3-4 months old, the Red Leicester here is about 6 months old. And it's quite a different texture. So for this one, again, the rind won't add too much flavor, so I wouldn't necessarily recommend eating it. It's natural, so don't worry about it. But again, it has been wrapped in cloth and then rubbed in lard to mature. To again, just kind of keep that breathability going on. This is made by David and Joe Clark in of course Leicestershire, and they actually were not cheesemakers at the heart of it. So unlike Applebee's and the Kirkhams, they really were not cheesemakers. They had simply inherited a herd of wholesome Frisian cows, and like many dairy farm owners, they were looking for a way to add value to their liquid milk. And so in speaking with ourselves and, with a lot of kind of other advice givers around the area, they decided that they wanted to bring back a very traditional British cheese that at the time, they started, I think, about 2005, Red Leicester in the kind of raw milk farmhouse kind of tradition, cloth bound, had kind of been extinct from the UK for about 50 years. Red Leicester really was I don't want to say victim, it seems too harsh, but it was hugely affected by the rationing program in kind of during the World Wars, because at that time there was a body set up in the UK called the Milk Marketing Board, which both guaranteed farmers a fair price for their milk, and also kind of stipulated what kind of cheese farmers could be making with their milk, because they wanted the cheese to be long-lasting, durable, protein-rich. So really, it kind of left it to cheddars and red Leicesters and the kind of more kind of dense aged cheeses that were kind of still acceptable to be made. And that, coupled with also the kind of onset of industrialization, a lot of red Leicester production just stopped being made in this kind of small scale way, because there really wasn't the impetus for farmers to kind of go through this very labor-heavy process of making cheese when they were being guaranteed a fair price for their milk. And also the production methods became industrialized, and so red Leicester just kind of became a very classic cheese wrapped in plastic in the supermarket, faceless, nameless, nothing really going on. And I think for a long time, and, I'm kind of speaking about this a bit secondhand because, of course, I didn't grow up in the UK. But red Leicester, you say red Leicester to somebody, and it would just be a very basic, melting cheese, growing up in for my generation at least, in the kind of 90s. And it's amazing because this cheese is so far from how it's been described to me, kind of casually, because it is a very, you can look at it, it's beautiful color. It's, as you're kind of eating this, it's very nutty, it's smooth, it's really kind of rich and flavorful, which is miles away from the kind of more industrialized cheeses with a bit less personality that you get in the supermarket. And this really, for them, is this rebirth of a classic, because in their region in the UK, red Leicester traditionally was actually kind of an add-on cheese to Stilton production. So Stilton, of course, being quite a popular cheese, red Leicester would be made with the kind of surplus milk from Stilton production, because of course it's longer lasting, it's more aged. So it was a really good way to kind of use up any extra milk that hadn't been used in a Stilton make. And so the two of them were kind of made side by side for quite a long time, which of course kind of, again, fell by the wayside with industrialization. And so they have kind of, brought back this cheese, very traditional to their region, but then also, in a kind of nice little turn of events, their son has now also started to make a Stilton style with their milk as well. And so once again, you have, a red Leicester and a Stilton style being made together, which is kind of heartwarming. I quite like that. But you can think, it must have been quite difficult at the beginning to kind of understand how to bring back this recipe, because they didn't have too much to draw on. They really had to go into old recipe books and really kind of go around their local area and ask people who remembered how red Leicester looked and tasted and the texture, to kind of help them redevelop this cheese in their own way. And it is lovely. It is definitely, we're getting up there in age, so again, about 6 months old. And I point this out here too, that, as they're making these cheeses, another kind of very traditional addition to these cheeses is the addition of traditional rennets, which is a fun thing to kind of talk about, I think, because I find it fascinating. But traditionally, cheese was kind of set up, like the actual enzyme that is added to milk to kind of allow it to firm up into cheese curds and separate out the whey, is an enzyme called rennet, which is sourced from the intestine lining of the milking animal, so the animal whose milk is going into the cheese. And a teeny tiny bit actually goes into the milk to create these cheeses. But that was a traditional kind of coagulating force, I guess, for the cheese. And it's something that, we also, a lot of our cheesemakers are really kind of looking back to, because they feel it has a much kind of more complex, kind of allows the flavors to kind of come together in a much more cohesive way. Sometimes, it can feel that vegetarian alternatives in an aged cheese can sometimes, become a bit bitter. And so traditional rennet can just allow for a bit more complexity of flavor. And so a lot of traditional cheesemakers are kind of using those traditional methods to set up the cheese. And Sparkling Red Leicester is a great example of that. Really kind of long-lasting flavors, beautiful. An absolutely wonderful melting cheese. So if you are looking for, a new cheese to kind of add into your mix of a grilled cheese, or to make mac and cheese, anything that needs a melter, Red Leicester is really, really wonderful. Welsh rarebit is a classic one here, which is basically just cheese on toast, a bit of, mustard and brown ale. But yeah, it's a good classic, again, very versatile cheese. Also, as you can imagine, this beautiful orange color. This is colored again with annatto. Probably a bit more. It is a quite heavy, very kind of rich hue, which you can imagine in a market in the I don't know 1800s of just seeing these beautiful sunny cheeses. I mean, that would certainly draw me in. Great. So that right there, your third cheese is Spark and Hoe Red Leicester. There you go. Great. So your last cheese today, and again our last kind of orange beauty, is a blue cheese. So this is Colston Bassett Shropshire. Isn't she a beauty? She really is. And this rind, I would just point out, completely edible, delicious. Don't miss out on the rind. We'll go through it in a sec why. But as you're starting to taste this, taste a bit both from the center and then taste a bit, from the bit right underneath the rind where it's a bit, less blue. Taste some of the rind. It's a beautiful cheese that really kind of has a lot of different flavors depending on where you actually give it a try. And so Colston Bassett Shropshire, who and where? Billy Kevin and his team in Colston Bassett, Nottinghamshire, of course. And essentially, Shropshire cheese is basically a Stilton cheese that has been colored with annatto. That's really the main difference. Stilton, of course, king of cheese, there you are, is one of Britain's most famous cheeses, one of its most popular. I know not everyone loves blue cheese. It's not always a kind of crowd pleaser, but I really recommend, even if you're slightly hesitant for blue cheese, try this one. Colston Bassett Stilton and Colston Bassett Shropshire really changed my idea of what I thought a blue cheese could be. It's a really kind of entry-level blue cheese, very creamy and sweet and very, very Moorish. It's beautiful. But as you kind of go ahead and taste, let me explain why I told you to do that. So the beauty about blue cheese in general is that it's maturing not only from the outside in, as all cheeses will do, but also it's going to be maturing from the inside out. So outside in, inside out. And that happens because when the cheese is formed as a cheese, it's allowed to kind of sit in a shelf, maturing shelf, there you are, for a few weeks. And then at that point, it's pierced with, a bunch of stainless steel needles, which you can kind of see actually. I'm not sure if you can see it on mine. A little bit, you can see the holes kind of in the rind. You'll see it a bit more on your own piece of cheese. But what that does is it allows air to penetrate into the center of the cheese. And that's what allows the blue to develop in the center of the cheese. There are certain blue cheeses that you can actually have kind of spontaneous bluing on the inside, depending on how they're made. But Stilton styles are made by piercing the cheese, and the kind of vast majority of blue cheese are made in that way. And so the goal really for Colston Bassett, our Stilton maker and the maker of the Shropshire cheese, is to basically not have the cheese be overly blue. Because of course, what they want is they want you to both taste the taste of the blue mold, which does have a taste, a bit more acidic, it's quite fruity and bright, but they also want you to taste the actual cheese itself. So the beauty of kind of blue cheese is that what happens with the blue in the interior of the cheese is the blue is kind of breaking down the cheese around it. So it's making it a bit, sweeter, a bit more, sharp, a bit more fruity, but it's changing the cheese around it. And so you kind of want a variety of flavors of just not like blue mold, because that's when you get those like very like sharp, acidic blues that are kind of overly like crazy strong blue. And the beauty of Colston Bassett blues is they have a beautiful balance of blue to kind of cheese ratio, if that makes sense. And so as you kind of taste this, you taste a bit from the center where it's, a bit more blue, you get a bit more of that kind of like sweet, like creaminess. And then if you taste a bit right under the rind, it'll be less blue, you taste more of the actual cheese itself. It'll also be a bit more kind of concentrated because the oxygen will have penetrated more into the cheese. And then you should definitely try the rind too, because the rind, I find, it's almost like having an oat cake, like built into the cheese. It's kind of earthy and kind of nutty and like nubbly. It's really good. So yeah, try all parts of the cheese. So it's a really kind of very, very, very different depending on where you actually have a bit of a taste. Right, so again, Shropshire Blue is very much so a Stilton make. The only real difference is the addition of annatto, which makes it orange. I believe this kind of stems back to a cheese dealer really in the 1930s from I think Cheshire, Shropshire, who had the idea to add annatto to Stilton and kind of create a new cheese. It's kind of gone through kind of popularity, kind of peaks and troughs over the years, but it's a real staple. And I'd say it's kind of like a sister cheese to Stilton, because for us, for Colston Bassett, Shropshire, they make a special recipe for ourselves at Neal's Yard Dairy that is the same as their Stilton recipe. And so what that means is, they'll pierce the cheeses a bit later in the process, which again kind of helps the flavors of the non-blue cheese develop a bit more, so you have a bit more of that balance. And what's also really unique about Colston Bassett is that they're really like stringent really about ladling their curds during the cheese make by hand, which allows for this beautiful, like very like creamy and light and very, very pleasing texture, I would say. And as you know, Stilton producers, because Stilton, you know, as a name has a name protection, Colston Bassett is really, I think the last one actually doing all of this kind of ladling by hand of the 5 or 6 Stilton producers still making Stilton. They are, I mean, it's a beautiful cheese. And they themselves also, so they've been going for quite a while, and they've actually only had, I think, 4 head cheesemakers since the 1920s, Billy Kevin being the 4th. And they've always worked with the kind of same 5 farms, you know, local to their production area in Nottinghamshire, to source their milk. It's kind of a co-op there that provides the milk. So it is probably the most traditional of the Stilton makers still being made. And there you are. So I think you guys will love that one. It's very kind of unique blue cheese, and not your kind of typical Stilton. It's really, really beautiful. And great, so this is your last cheese there, then Shropshire Blue, Colston Bassett. And that is your cheese board here. I think I've kind of made a bit of a mess in my breaking off my Cheshire and Lancashires. But to recap, 4 real British classics, quite unique to have them all together here, and also all in the States. You know, again, I had no idea these cheeses existed when I was growing up in the States, so it's so much fun to actually see them traveling about. But we had Applebee's Cheshire there at the front, Kirkham's Lancashire, Sparkenhove Red Leicester, and Colston Bassett Shropshire. Beautiful. I hope you enjoy. Definitely do experiment in getting them into some, you know, cheese toasties or cooking with them. You know, again, British cheese is just, you know, at the heart of it, they were cheeses, you know, made on the farm for farm workers. And so they are completely the most versatile cheeses in the world. Yeah, have some fun. And the very last note on cheese care, you may notice that, you know, some of these cheeses, as they kind of hang out in your fridges are very dry, not necessarily the best, you know, area for cheeses. If you do get a bit of blue on the surface, like I had a little bit of blue on that one there, don't worry, take a knife and just scrape up the surface there, remove all the blue mold, white mold, whatever kind of comes, and everything underneath will be just fine and good to eat. Okay, great. Thank you very much for joining me. I hope you enjoy and have a good day. Bye.